So good morning, everyone. This is, again, Liz Bastian with WSDOT. I'm also here with Evan Olson. I am on the TDM team with WSDOT's Public Transportation Division. Evan is on our grants team. So we are here today to talk about the First Mile, Last Mile Connections Grant. So this is a new grant that was created by the Washington State Legislature, the TDM Technical Committee, and the TDM Executive Board. It goes through the end of this current biennium, so June 30th, 2021, and we'll talk more about those specifics during this webinar. So we will have time at the end of this webinar for questions and answers. We ask that everyone remain on mute throughout the duration of this webinar. And if you have any questions at any time throughout the webinar, please share them in the chat box. And then at the end of the webinar, we will go through all of them, answer as many as we can before the end of the hour. So again, please keep yourselves on mute. Any questions that you have, please share them in the chat box and we will get to them at the end. This webinar is being recorded and we're hoping to post it sometime next week. So if you have colleagues or partners who were unable to make it, have questions, this should be available online to view. And of course, if you have questions after this webinar, you're welcome to reach out to myself and Evan at any point in time. Our contact information will be at the end of these slides, and it is also posted on the Notice of Funding Opportunity page on our website. So I think, excuse me, that's all the housekeeping that I had. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's get started. Okay. So we're going to spend about 10 minutes doing an overview of the program. Then we'll really dig into the application requirements, have some supplemental information at the end that's good to share, and then we should have at least 15 minutes for your Q&A at the end. So again, if you have questions throughout any of this, put them in the chat box. We will get to them at that last Q&A session. And please mute yourselves. Thank you. Okay, so the purpose of this program is to create new first last mile connections to improve the beginning or the end of a trip to public transportation services. And these need to be existing public transportation services. There is a lot of different eligible applicants, including businesses, cities, counties, metropolitan planning organizations, nonprofits, ports, regional transportation planning organizations, and also tribes. Transit agencies are not eligible, but they may partner with other eligible applicants on these projects. And we can talk more about that later and what that looks like. So what is eligible? What can you use the first mile, last mile grant funds for? So projects must propose first mile, last mile solutions to public transportation services that include public agency operated buses, ferries, rail, water taxis, tribal transit, and van pools. Solutions may include things like shuttles, ride hailing, van pool, van share, carpool, bike share, or paratransit and demand response. Other solutions may include things like bicycle lockers and racks, pavement striping, transit pass subsidies, incentives, think transportation demand management incentives, public education, marketing, and parking management for multiple modes. Solutions may focus on all types of trips and not just commutes. So you could think about human services transportation, health services, running errands, school trips. So there's a lot of different options in terms of what you can use these funds for. There are some things that are not eligible though, and that includes building or expanding single occupancy vehicle parking, or using state funds for emergency guaranteed ride home services. We also have some funding priorities as an agency for this. So any service that is proposed as part of the project does need to give equal access to people with disabilities following the Americans with Disabilities Act. It also does need to be open to the public. And we do want to share that additional consideration will be given to projects that can demonstrate accessibility of services for underserved communities and vulnerable populations. So $1 million Let me make sure my screen is still being shared. Perfect. Okay. $1 million has been appropriated for this current biennium for this grant project. The project period or the time of award estimated based on when we get award letters out and contracts signed, but we're hoping June 2020 through the end of the biennium, which is June 30th, 2021. And then I'm going to call on Evan to talk about no guarantees of reappropriation past the end of the biennium.
Sure, thanks. Can everyone hear me okay?
You're good.
All right. So, all right. The reappropriation of funds, as everyone knows, the state fiscal year and biennium is how funds are appropriated for our state. And so state funds lapse at the end of the biennium. In a good year, we would expect that all funds are expended at the end of the biennium anyways, with kind of current funding right now in COVID and maybe the lack of sales tax and other revenue sources is even more of an impetus for us to make sure that we spend out those funds by June 30th of 2021. So let's keep it as a target date. Under the best of years, it's possible that we could potentially have projects reappropriated to the next biennium, but again, given the circumstances I just mentioned, it's even more important for us to make sure that we spend out those funds by the end of June 30, 2021.
Awesome. Thanks, Evan. Okay, so the important questions, what do you need to fill out as part of this application? So I'm sure many of you received the Notice of Funding Opportunity email that had the application attached. The application is also posted on our website. And if you have any issues finding that, please feel free to reach out to Evan or myself. I can also share that link directly into the chat box later. So parts of the application, we have the project title, essentially what are you calling your proposed project, a summary of the proposed project, so that would include eligible activities, any businesses that you're partnering with, what existing public transportation routes your solution is connecting to, if you're serving any specific vulnerable population, how your service will be accommodating ADA, a lot of stuff in that project summary. And then scoring criteria. So there's 6 different topics that we're going to look at in terms of the evaluation panel will look at in evaluating this. So we have qualitative description of need, and that has to do with the project summary. So really talking about why this first mile, last mile service is going to improve connections to public transportation and how it's going to do that. Discussion of benefits, so what kind of benefits your service will be providing. Social justice and equity, so that gets to if and how you're serving vulnerable populations. Goals and metrics, so there is some performance reporting and data collection required as part of this. We give 3 examples of metrics that you could choose from, and they are change in transit ridership, number of total trips, and number of total passengers served. So as part of the proposal, you're more than welcome, of course, to create and track additional metrics, but we're asking that you choose at least one of those 3, which are, again, total number of first mile, last mile trips provided, total number of passengers served, or change in transit ridership that can be directly attributed to your first mile, last mile service. So your explanation of what metric you're choosing, that very clearly showing that you have chosen at least one of those metrics and how you're going to be track it, and also showing that you can meet the performance reporting dates that we asked for. That's what will go into the goals and metrics. Wages and healthcare, this is a new one. So if you are a provider that is proposing a first mile, last mile service that may use independent contractors, you will get bonus points in your application if you could show that you are paying independent contractors a living wage and also providing them benefits like healthcare. So again, it's not a requirement of the grant, but depending on what your proposal is, if it involves independent contractors or employees demonstrating that you can do that, you will receive extra points in your grant application. And then readiness to proceed, that's really just, can you, will you be able to meet the deadlines, spend the funds by the end of the biennium? Is your project something that can actually happen within the time that we have left for this grant? And then we also have some questions that we're asking everyone to fill out as part of the application, but will not impact your scoring. So that has to be that includes scalability. So could your project scale up, scale down? How could that happen? Can you talk a little bit about that? And then milestones. So just listing the milestones that you would have for your particular project. And of course that would differ depending on what you're proposing as part of your service. And then of course we also have financial information and application authority. Evan, do you want to talk a little bit about that, or is that pretty self-explanatory?
The financial information is pretty self-explanatory. I will just touch on it a little bit to say that we give broad latitude for people to fill in their budget line items as they see fit. One of the things about this grant program is that it is pretty flexible, because we're anticipating that people are going to have some pretty creative solutions to the first mile, last mile gap. So we didn't necessarily want to lock people down into too narrow of a line item in the budget. But wanted to leave it a little bit flexible for people to describe their budgets as they see sufficient. You'll notice at the bottom of that particular page that there is a spot for local matching funds. And again, those are not required, but people can indicate their local match there. It has not necessarily been discussed that additional match is additional scoring criteria. So I don't want people to have the false impression that they will be getting a higher score if they provide match. It is just, again, a place that people can indicate a level of partnership and coordination should they have those resources available to them. And then when we think about application authority, that is a pretty standard spot on the application where you check off that you as a person filling out the application have the authority to sign on behalf of your agency and enter into a contract, and that everything is true to the best of your knowledge that you've entered into the application. It's a pretty standard format. Most people have someone who is kind of their designated grants administrator, or someone at the a little higher level, which is maybe like a CEO or a general manager, something of that nature. Ready to go on here. Looking at the timetable, you notice that the funding availability was indicated this last Monday, April 13th. We've given people about 5 weeks until applications are due on Friday, May 22nd. Shortly thereafter, we will have application evaluation for about 2 weeks. It's going to be pretty quick, but we believe we can do that. We will be involving an evaluation panel of TDM experts, so people who are familiar with the type of projects that will be submitted, ideally. We have 2 main meetings that we want to get the evaluation scores to be in front of, which is the TDM Technical Committee and the TDM Executive Board meetings on June 18th and 23rd. They will review and kind of give approval of the final list. And then, of course, we have the notice of award. That is a pretty ambitious date for June 30, but I think if everything falls in line with what we have scheduled above, then we can be able to make that. So projects would ideally be able to start on July 1 of 2020. Go ahead and move forward.
I keep getting Microsoft Teams notifications popping up, and I think it's messing with my screen share. So give me 1 second. Okay, come on. There we go. Yes, okay, sorry.
So thinking about supplemental information, Liz mentioned before, as she was walking through the different parts of the application, we do want documented support from any directly affected public transit agency. So because the purpose of this grant is to connect with fixed route services, we want to make sure that the people who are part of that particular project scope are going to be given documented support. You've talked to them, they understand what you're planning, and that they support the project. Similarly, if your project involves any kind of city or county as it's passing through them, or it involves a port or a tribe, you should also contact those organizations and get their document support as well. And that includes metropolitan planning organizations and regional transportation planning organizations. The idea being that it is ideal, it would be great if you could point to something within some of those plans that indicates kind of a need for this. It's not necessarily a requirement that it has to come from a plan, but it definitely shows that I think the ideas are supported at a regional and metropolitan level. And lastly, document support for the proposal from all directly affected entities must be provided by the date of project award in order to receive funding. So keep in mind, this is not necessarily the deadline for the application. You still have time to get in those documented support letters after that, but just make sure that it is before the anticipated date of award, which again, we have penciled in for June 30, at the end of the biennium. Or end of the fiscal year, excuse me.
And I'll just add that while letters of support would be great, an email that expresses documented support is also sufficient, right, Evan?
That's a great point. Correct. We don't necessarily have to have something on like letterhead with signature at the bottom. Just can email. All right, so I think that kind of brings us to the end of the portions that we wanted to talk about for this particular informational webinar. If you have any additional questions or technical assistance, feel free to reach out to any of the people listed there, Ricardo, Liz, or myself. At this point, I think we can shift over to the chat log and see if people had any questions along the way.
Yeah, and before we get started, Ricardo, are you on the line? Maybe. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started with questions. So the first question, would transit shelters qualify for funding? So my first guess at this, answering this is that I would say so. Again, you just have to demonstrate that whatever you're proposing is connecting to existing fixed route transit. So while transit shelters are technically small capital, which I think is an allowable expense in terms of this grant, unless you can show that the transit shelters are providing a service that is helping connect people to existing public transportation routes, I'm not sure if that would qualify for funding, but I could see that a project proposal where that argument is made. So that's kind of up to you and how you want to do that. Do you have anything additional to answer that question, Evan?
I would probably just kind of echo much of what you said, is that, it's kind of hard when we have those real specific questions like a transit shelter. I think in many cases, I think the answer will be, it depends. And to Liz's point, it's really kind of how you craft the narrative and are able to really talk about how that makes that solve the gap in the first mile last connection. And just also to echo that, yes, small capital is allowable expenditure for this particular grant.
Yeah. Okay, great. Next question. What is the relation of human services plans to project evaluation? That's a great question. So again, I'll take a stab at answering this, and then Evan, you can do cleanup as you normally do. So I would say that any connection that you can show in your proposal to how this new first mile, last mile service that connects to existing public transportation is connected to things that are already set in plans. So it doesn't need to be human services plans. It could be a short or long range transportation plan. I think a lot of us on the call are planners, so we love our plans. So any connection that you can make to that, I think could strengthen the argument. of your proposal. And I could also see, again, this would be kind of up to the evaluators, but human services transportation could impact the score in the social justice and equity evaluation criteria. But I don't, that's not to say that you need a direct connection to a human services transportation plan to submit a proposal. That would, I think, just kind of be a supplementary benefit.
Exactly. That was the only point I was going to make of that last part, is that unlike some of our grants where there actually is a requirement to connect to human services, this is not like that. So everything that Liz mentioned about strengthening the application is, those are good points.
Okay, we have a question from Allison from Tukwila. Hey, Allison. How do you see COVID-19 impacting TDM outreach, encouraging transit use? How should this be incorporated into applications? So I think, Allison, I think you were on our ACT Cascade chapter call earlier this week, where we had a really long-ranging discussion about TDM and transit use kind of during and post COVID-19 social distancing and sheltering in place. So I wish I had an answer to your question, but I don't think I do at this point. Everything is kind of so up in the air, and while we as a public transportation division are not necessarily on the front lines like many transit agencies and cities and jurisdictions are, kind of doing operations and responding to this COVID crisis in real time. We are trying to support our partners as best as we can, and that was one of the reasons that we decided to release this grant now, because we think that it can add some value despite COVID-19 and the impacts that it's having on transit use. So I don't feel really comfortable giving a specific answer on how that should be incorporated into applications. I think if you feel like you should address it, please do so. This is something that is impacting all of us. So we're all kind of going through it. We all have knowledge of what's going on, and we're just trying to stay on top of it. So if you feel like it's related to your service, or that it would be related to the existing public transportation route that you're connecting, feel free to address that. And if you want to follow up, or if anyone else wants to follow up, has more specific questions about that, feel free to shoot me or Evan an email, and I can also kind of run this up the chain and see if we can, if there's other guidance that we could give out related to that. Anything to add, Evan?
You covered that really well. I think yes, as much as people can discuss with their current practices and how they're thinking about COVID in services is something that I think adds to an application and does not take away. And to your last point, yeah, I think this is an issue that impacts all of our grant programs. And so I think we do need to touch base with our management and make sure we address COVID as part of this program, but also others as part of our Q&A that we'll be publishing afterward.
Yes, great point. So there will be some Q&A that is published related to this grant, and all of these questions will be incorporated into that. Next question, would public restrooms located at or near transit facilities qualify for the grant? So I would probably give the same answer that I gave about transit shelters for that. Again, the purpose of this grant is to improve first mile, last mile connections to existing public transportation routes. So if you could make the argument that public restrooms would do that as part of your grant, great. Public restrooms, I will admit, I'm not sure if that still counts as small capital, but it seems like it would be an eligible expense, but you would just, again, have to make the connection that you are improving first mile, last mile routes to public transportation. Next question, is there preference for more permanent solutions, e.g. infrastructure, versus temporary solutions such as incentives or subsidies? I don't think that there is a preference versus those two. Evan, do you have anything to add to this?
No, I say there's no preference. In fact, I think we purposely left that agnostic on that point. Thinking through this, I think the breadth of what people could possibly apply for, we acknowledge that, I think that some of the quick responses might be things like incentives or subsidies, but if a certain project like paying a sidewalk that helps people make that first mile, last mile is something someone wanted to apply for, that would be on equal footing with everything else.
And the last question I'm seeing here, at what point do you expect to know whether the funding will continue after this biennium? Evan, I'm going to turn that over to you because you have a little bit more experience with this than I do.
Sure. So I think that the short answer is we don't necessarily have a great idea of when we would know. Most of this comes through our discussions with the legislature during legislative session, and so that's generally when we set up the budgets and the priorities for the upcoming biennium. So that would be basically winter of 2021 is when they start those discussions. Now, keep in mind, because of everything that's recently happened in the world with the pandemic, revenues are being talked about, pretty closely. So those will be part of the discussions as we go into the legislative session of 2021, which means that we don't really have a solid answer at this point.
Okay, is there an expectation to take the peanut butter approach and spread the funds as evenly as possible throughout the state? That is another great question. So what we have, working with the TDM Technical Committee and Executive Board, we have set intentions for how we plan to distribute these funds, recognizing that it will depend on what kind of applications we get and where they are located. So the intentions that we have set for distributing this funding, one is that we want to award at least 2 different projects, and we're hoping that at least one of those projects will be in an urban area and one will be in a small urban or rural area. And the reason for those intentions is because early on, the sprint team of technical committee members that was tasked with kind of creating the original parameters of this grant decided that the purpose of this grant would not be to necessarily launch these first mile, last mile connections and have them established beyond pilot mode. The intention is really to learn, because this is still kind of a new thing and this is a new grant program. So we really want to see how different first mile, last mile solutions can work in different communities throughout the state of Washington. So I wouldn't say there's an expectation to peanut butter it and spread the funds evenly, but we are hoping that we'll get enough applications from different places throughout the state that we will be able to spread the funds at least a little bit in a way that we can really learn as much as we can about first mile, last mile connections to transit. And yes, this presentation will be available for people who did not attend the meeting. We are recording this presentation right now, and then we're going to work with our web and IT team to get it up on WSDOT's YouTube channel and post it on the website. So we will send this link out via email once we have that ready to go. And just keep your eye on the WSDOT website under public transportation grants. It should be pretty easy to find there. Question, will you publish all proposals or just awardees? Evan, I'm going to have you answer that question.
Sure. Our general practice for our grants programs is that we do not publish all proposals. We just publish a list of the awardees. If people are interested in seeing other proposals, they can feel free to contact anyone else that they knew applied for the program itself. Just as a general rule, again, we normally publish the list of awardees and not necessarily everyone who applied.
And a point from that is that collectively we could improve each other's proposals.
That is absolutely, it's a good point. Periodically through our grant outreach, what we do is we kind of do like a best practices, and we always make sure that we want to work with the applicant agency who was awarded to make sure that they are comfortable with us either publishing their name, and if they're not, we try to pull out as much specific identifying information as possible. Basically, we want to make sure that the entity who is applying to us is fully comfortable with us sharing their information.
Any more questions? Feel free to type them in the chat box. I'll give everyone a minute or two if there's any more questions. And again, share in the meantime. So you should see on the screen my contact information, Evan's contact information, and Ricardo Gatla, who is the head of the TDM team at the Public Transportation Division. So at any time, you can reach out to us, send us an email, give us a call if you have questions like the ones that we answered today, or if you have other questions about this grant or application. We are here to provide technical assistance, so please feel free to use us as resources. Can we get a printout of your PowerPoint? That's a great question. Yeah, we can totally make this into a slide deck and send that out. And we'll also have the video recorded as well. And then another question, can a project be in partnership with a local transit agency? Yes, a project can absolutely be in partnership. So the transit agencies, if you remember, are not eligible as direct recipients. But they can totally partner with someone who is an eligible direct recipient. So a local jurisdiction, a business, and again, you do want to make sure you have that documented support of your project from whatever transit agency that your first mile, last mile solution is connecting to. So yes, partnerships with transit agencies are good for this kind of grant. And I'll give about 1 more minute just to see if there's any additional questions. Evan, anything to add? We wrap up?
I don't necessarily have anything to add. Just want to echo that if people have questions after this, they can feel free to email anyone who's listed here on the PowerPoint. We'll be more than happy to address your questions. And just remind everyone that we will also, in addition to having this recording and making the PowerPoint accessible, we will also be publishing that questions and answers document, posting it online.
Yes. Okay, and seeing no more questions, I think we can go ahead and give everyone back. Oh, we do have one more question. Okay, I have been going through the paperwork for the grant. We already have a fixed route system, but it does not provide service every day of the week. Can we use this grant to expand? It depends. I'll go with that classic answer. So again, the purpose of the grant is to improve first mile, last mile connections to existing public transportation. So yeah, it sounds like you have an existing route and you're asking about expanding that route. If you can argue that that is a first mile, last mile solution that is enhancing the connections to your existing route, that sounds like it would be a proposal that you could submit. But if it's just merely expanding the existing route without getting more people onto it in a way that's improving first mile, last mile, I'm not sure if that would be eligible. Anything to add, Evan?
No, I would agree. Yeah, if it's just expansion of the existing fixed route, I think that's a hard argument to make and sounds outside of what the purpose of this grant program is. But it's really about that making sure people can get to or from the fixed route service that you currently have.
Yeah. Or could they use it to provide demand responsive service to provide coverage when their system isn't running? So to me, that sounds much more like an eligible activity than just expanding a fixed route system. I'm thinking of Via to Transit in King County, if anyone's familiar with that service. So it's a van that you can will take you to certain light rail stations and bus stops that you can is demand response. So you can call it with your phone or use a smartphone app. So that is a first mile, last mile solution to public transit is that service. So something like that is demand responsive, yes. With the caveat that it depends how that's incorporated into your project proposal. But I think that's a stronger project than just expanding the existing fixed route system. Okay. I'm not seeing any more questions come in. But again, I know I'm sounding like a broken record here, but this is not the only forum to ask questions. So please, please, please feel free to use myself, Evan, and Ricardo as resources. This webinar is being recorded. We'll have the slide deck ready to share, and hopefully also a video recording. So we're trying to get that posted as quickly as possible. We're hoping early next week. But we also know our web team has a lot going on right now, so we're trying to be cognizant of that. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you for being interested in this grant program. We're very excited about it, and we're really enthused by everyone's interest in this, especially since it just went out earlier this week. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh, we do have one more question. Okay, we have shelters in our local towns with the reservations. Can we utilize the grant to provide services to and from workplaces / grocery stores? So again, the purpose of the grant is to improve first mile, last mile connections to transit, but it's not just commute. So any kind of trip is eligible. So it depends how you talk about that in your project proposal, but non-commute related trips, so trips to grocery stores, trips to and from workplaces, those are eligible activities. Okay. And I think with that we can wrap it up. Evan, anything else to add?
No, I just wanted to say thank you for the wonderful presentation and the interest from everyone here. I think it's exciting to see how many people who attended today, and I look forward to seeing the unique types of applications that will be coming in.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone. Stay home and stay healthy and take care of yourselves and your family. Take care. Bye.
Bye.